Conquerors, queens, and kings are often buried with their riches. But what about all the tombs that are hidden? These missing tombs might contain treasures like the ones discovered in King Tutankhamun's tomb. Cleopatra and Mark Antony were buried in splendid and regal fashion, but their tomb has never been found. Sometimes tombs' locations were kept secret deliberately. Genghis Khan and Attila ensured their final resting places remained secret, even having those who buried them killed to keep the locations unknown. The Soviets erased all traces of the Third Reich leader's burial site to prevent it from becoming a shrine for extremists, and others simply disappeared over time. History is full of mysteries, but few are as tantalizing as these missing tombs. Here are 15 mysterious tombs that are still hidden from the world. Let's kick off things with number 15, Alexander the Great's burial site. Alexander the Great spent 12 years carving out one of history's most formidable empires, stretching from Greece to Egypt to Persia. He was a warrior, a strategist, a king, but at just 32 years old in 323 BC, he was dead. And while his tomb once drew visitors from across the ancient world, today, it's nowhere to be found. At first, Alexander's body was interred in Memphis, Egypt, a move made by his general Ptolemy I, who hijacked the body to strengthen his own claim to power. But later, it was relocated to Alexandria, the city Alexander himself founded, where it became a near-holy site. Even Julius Caesar made a pilgrimage to pay his respects in 48 BC. Then, disaster struck. A tsunami hammered Alexandria, and the rising sea level forced its people to build over ancient ruins. As the centuries passed, Alexander's tomb vanished beneath layers of history. Despite more than 140 excavations, the tomb remains lost, fueling endless speculation. Some believe it's beneath modern Alexandria, while others think it lies in an undiscovered crypt. Until someone finds it, his final resting place remains a mystery. Number 14. Genghis Khan Tomb. Genghis Khan wasn't just a conqueror. He was the architect of the largest contiguous empire in history. But when he died in 1227, he made one thing crystal clear. No one could ever find his grave. His followers made sure of it. A select group of men carried the great Khan's body deep into Mongolia, cutting down anyone who crossed their path. After the burial, they trampled the ground with 1,000 horses to erase any trace. Some say they went even further, diverting a river over the site to ensure the tomb would never be uncovered. And as if that wasn't enough, legend has it that those who buried him were then executed, sealing the secret forever. For 800 years, explorers and archaeologists have searched for Genghis Khan's tomb. Some have scoured Mongolia's remote mountains. Others have used satellites to scan the landscape. But Mongolian culture considers the search disrespectful. As one local put it, if they wanted us to find it, they would have left a sign. And so the tomb of the man who ruled most of Asia remains lost, just as he intended. Number 13. Cleopatra and Mark Antony's tomb. The love story of Mark Antony and Cleopatra was never going to have a happy ending. After years of war, betrayal, and political games, the Roman general and the Egyptian queen met their tragic fate in 30 BC, taking their own lives before Octavian's army could capture them. But according to Roman historians, their enemy granted them an unexpected honor, being buried together in a grand tomb. For centuries, their final resting place has been one of the biggest archaeological mysteries. But in 2019, a discovery near Alexandria sent waves through the history world. Archaeologists uncovered a network of tunnels and chambers beneath a temple in Taposiris Magna, a site linked to Cleopatra's reign. Could this be the long-lost tomb? While some scholars remain skeptical, others believe Cleopatra and Antony's burial site could still be hiding beneath the sands of Egypt, waiting for the moment when history finally gives up its secrets. Number 12. Attila the Hun's tomb. Attila the Hun was one of Rome's greatest nightmares. In the 5th century, he led his warriors in brutal campaigns across Europe, striking terror into the hearts of his enemies. But his death? That came unexpectedly, during a wedding feast. His warriors sent him off in dramatic fashion. The Huns cut their own faces, mourning him with their own blood before preparing his burial. Attila wasn't laid to rest in just any coffin. He was placed in 3, one of iron, one of silver, and one of gold. Then, his men diverted a river, buried him in the dry riverbed, and let the water flow back over the site. As a final touch, they slaughtered everyone involved in the burial to ensure the secret would never be revealed. For centuries, treasure hunters have dreamed of finding Attila's tomb, hoping it holds vast riches. In 2014, workers in Budapest claimed to have found it, a chamber filled with skeletons, weapons, and a massive sword. But the discovery turned out to be fake. Attila's real tomb, still missing, and likely buried beneath a river somewhere in Eastern Europe, just as the Huns intended. Number 11. Hawaii's King Kamehameha. Hawaii's first king, Kamehameha the Great, unified the islands and established a dynasty. But when he died in 1819, his advisors made sure no one would ever find his tomb. In Hawaiian tradition, the bones of great leaders held immense power, so to prevent them from being stolen or misused, Kamehameha's remains were hidden in a secret burial cave. Even 2 decades later, historians admitted they had no clue where the great king's body lay. And nearly 2 centuries later, that hasn't changed. A Hawaiian proverb says, "The morning star alone knows where Kamehameha's bones are guarded." One of his royal descendants, King David Kalakaua, tried to locate the tomb in the late 1800s. He found a hidden cave and retrieved 2 skeletons, bringing them to the royal mausoleum. But to this day, no one knows if those remains actually belonged to Kamehameha. His true burial site remains one of Hawaii's enduring mysteries. Number 10. Queen Boudica. Boudica wasn't just a queen. She was a warrior, a rebel, and the leader of a full-scale uprising against the Romans in Britain. In 60 AD, after Roman forces mistreated her people and took her lands, she rallied an army and burned London to the ground. But after one final battle, she disappeared from history. Her death remains a mystery. Some accounts say she took poison to avoid capture. Others claim she died from illness. The Romans, who had every reason to erase her from history, claimed she was buried in a grand tomb filled with riches. But no one has ever found it. One popular theory says her grave lies beneath King's Cross railway station in London. But archaeologists aren't convinced. Most Iron Age people weren't buried in monumental tombs. Instead, it's likely Boudica was laid to rest in a way that left no trace, making her final resting place yet another mystery lost to time. What do you say about it? Let us know. Now, let's move to Number 9. Nefertiti may be buried near King Tut. When archaeologist Howard Carter cracked open King Tut's tomb in 1922, it was a jackpot of riches and artifacts. But it also raised another question. Where was Nefertiti? For centuries, the whereabouts of Egypt's most famous queen remained one of archaeology's greatest mysteries. But in 2020, researchers using radar scans on Tutankhamun's tomb found something intriguing: hidden chambers that could potentially hold Nefertiti's long-lost burial site. Nefertiti was more than just a queen. She was a power player. Some historians even believe she ruled Egypt as a pharaoh in her own right. Her daughter married Tutankhamun, making Nefertiti his mom-in-law, and given how closely royal burials were arranged, her tomb might not be far from his. If these hidden chambers hold her remains, it could finally answer a major historical debate. Did Nefertiti rule as a pharaoh after her husband's death? Well, no person on earth knows this. Number 8. Mozart's unmarked grave may be lost forever. For a man who gave the world some of the most brilliant compositions in history, Mozart's burial was shockingly unceremonious. When he died in Vienna in 1791, he was buried in a gemeinsame Gruft, a common grave for those without the means for a grand burial. No special markers, no ornate tomb, just a pauper's plot shared with at least 4 or 5 other bodies. For decades, even Mozart's admirers had no idea where he was buried. Then, a gravedigger supposedly took matters into his own hands, literally. According to legend, he retrieved Mozart's skull and kept it as a relic. By 1902, the skull had made its way to the Mozarteum in Salzburg, where it remains to this day. Scientists have tested it, hoping to confirm its authenticity, but the results are inconclusive. In all likelihood, Mozart's bones, wherever they may be, are lost to history, making his final resting place a mystery as enduring as his music. Number 7. Thomas Paine's rival stole his body for a proper burial. Thomas Paine, the fiery author of Common Sense, was one of the most influential figures of the American Revolution. But when he died in 1809, he was nearly forgotten, so much so that only a handful of people attended his funeral. And his body? Well, that's when things got weird. A decade after Paine's death, his former enemy-turned-admirer, William Cobbett, decided America wasn't giving the revolutionary his due respect. So, in 1819, Cobbett stole Paine's body and hauled it back to England, hoping to give him a grand burial. The problem? No one in England wanted the honor. Even Lord Byron mocked the whole ordeal, writing, "You visit him on earth again. He'll visit you in hell." When Cobbett died in 1835, Paine's bones were still in his possession. From there, they vanished, traded, sold, and passed around like souvenirs. Today, no one knows where they ended up. Number 6. Leonardo da Vinci's tomb. Leonardo da Vinci wasn't just a painter. He was a genius, a scientist, and a visionary centuries ahead of his time. After spending his final years in France under the patronage of King Francis I, he was buried in the chapel of Saint-Florentin at Château d'Amboise. But when the French Revolution swept through, it took da Vinci's tomb with it. Revolutionaries destroyed the chapel, leaving his grave in ruins. Years later, his supposed remains were moved to a smaller chapel at the same chateau. But there was one problem. Was it actually da Vinci's body? Today, scientists want to settle the mystery once and for all with DNA testing. But there's a catch. Leonardo never had children, so direct descendants don't exist. Instead, researchers are tracing the lineage of his half-brother to compare their DNA with a lock of hair said to belong to the Renaissance master. If the tests are successful, we might finally confirm where da Vinci truly rests. Number 5. Adolf Hitler's final burial site. In 1945, as the Third Reich collapsed around him, Adolf Hitler took his own life inside his Berlin bunker. His loyal followers quickly burned his body, attempting to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. But when Soviet forces stormed the city on May 5th, they found what was left of Hitler and his wife, Eva Braun. At first, the Soviets hid the remains in a German forest, only to dig them up a year later and move them to an army garrison. Then, in 1970, before abandoning the site, the KGB made sure Hitler's body would never become a rallying point. A secret Soviet document details what happened next. His remains were exhumed, burned on a bonfire near Magdeburg, ground into ashes, and dumped into the Biederitz River. The Soviets made sure no trace of Hitler's grave remained. To this day, his final resting place is nothing more than a space in history. Number 4. Alfred the Great was supposedly buried. King Alfred the Great wasn't just any ruler. He was the man who fought off Viking invasions, united England, and became the only English king to earn the title the Great. But despite his legendary status, his remains have been lost for centuries. After his death in 899 AD, Alfred was buried in Winchester. But over the next 2 centuries, his body was moved multiple times, first to a grand church, then to Hyde Abbey in the 1100s. When Henry VIII shut down England's monasteries, Hyde Abbey was destroyed, and Alfred's tomb was looted. After that, his remains simply vanished. Over the years, excavations have tried to track down the missing king. In one dig, archaeologists found a single human bone, but it belonged to a woman. Another theory suggests construction in the 19th century scattered his remains beyond recovery. Unless a breakthrough happens, Alfred the Great's bones may be lost forever. Now let's talk about Number 3. The Lost Tomb of Emperor Qin Shi Huang. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, built an empire that still echoes through history. He unified warring states, standardized currency, and most famously, ordered the creation of the legendary Terracotta Army. But while his clay soldiers were discovered in 1974, his actual tomb, still untouched. Buried beneath a massive hill in Xi'an, China, Qin Shi Huang's final resting place is rumored to contain rivers of mercury, booby traps, and treasures beyond imagination. Ancient records claim the tomb was designed to mirror his empire, with entire cities recreated underground. So why hasn't it been opened? The high mercury levels in the soil suggest the legend might be true. Until archaeologists find a safe way to explore it, Qin Shi Huang's tomb remains one of the greatest mysteries in history, sealed away just as the emperor intended. Number 2. The treasure-filled tomb of Montezuma. Montezuma II, the last true Aztec emperor, met his downfall in 1520 when Spanish conquistadors, led by Hernán Cortés, arrived in Tenochtitlan. Whether he was murdered by the Spanish or by his own betrayed people remains unclear, but one thing is certain: his final resting place has never been found. According to legend, after Montezuma's death, the Aztecs hid his body and vast riches to keep them out of Spanish hands. Some believe his tomb lies somewhere beneath modern-day Mexico City, buried under centuries of urban development. Others claim his remains and treasure were secretly moved north, with wild theories placing them as far as Utah. Despite treasure hunters and historians searching for centuries, Montezuma's burial site remains lost to time. If ever found, it could rewrite what we know about the fall of the Aztec Empire and reveal the wealth the Spanish never managed to steal. Number 1. The Tomb of Jesus Christ. No tomb in history is more debated, mysterious, or significant than that of Jesus Christ. The Bible states that after his crucifixion, Jesus was buried in a rock-cut tomb, and 3 days later, the tomb was found empty, giving rise to Christianity's core belief in his resurrection. But where exactly was this tomb, and what happened to it? Many believe it was located at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, a site revered since at least the 4th century. Others argue that Jesus was buried in the Garden Tomb, another site outside the city walls. Some skeptics even suggest his body was secretly relocated or lost to history. Regardless of belief, Jesus' tomb remains one of the most sacred and sought-after sites in the world. Whether hidden, destroyed, or simply beyond confirmation, its mystery endures, fueling religious devotion, archaeological exploration, and endless debate. If you've enjoyed watching this video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for tuning in with us, and we'll see you soon in the next one.